All right, guys. So Donald Trump has been sort of off his game recently. I think ever since his best friend, his confidant, his soulmate, Joseph Robinette Biden, decided to drop out unceremoniously of the 2024 election, Trump has been completely lost in the sauce. He can't figure out the right attack lines for Kamala and for Tim Walz. He's been, I think, in a state of despair. I don't think that I have seen him this off his game in a very long time. And so he has been lashing out. One of the more recent things, and I got a couple things lined up here for you guys. One of the more recent things is that he has gotten into a little bit of a skirmish, a beef, with one Joe Rogan of the Joe Rogan Experience, like it or not, one of the most popular podcasters in the country, in the world maybe. And this was all over Joe Rogan, basically just like throwing some kind words at RFK Jr. So let's go ahead and watch this first Joe Rogan clip here, and then we'll see how Trump responded to all of this.
And the only one who's not doing that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
You a fan?
Yeah, I am a fan. Yeah, he's the only one that makes sense to me. He's the only one that he doesn't attack people. He attacks actions and ideas, but he's much more reasonable and intelligent. I mean, the guy was an environmental attorney and cleaned up the East River. I mean, he's a legitimate guy. You know, before anybody started calling him an anti-vaxxer, which I thought he was too. I thought he was this nut, this like conspiracy theorist nut, until I read his book. I read The Real Anthony Fauci, and I'm like, what is it? How much of this is real? Because if it's all real, this is fucking insane, and we live in a world where we're being manipulated by these health organizations that are being paid by the pharmaceutical drug interests. And these pharmaceutical drug companies are pumping these products out into the population and telling us that we need them, and then making insane amounts of money. And then also the government is in on it. And also they share a patent with Moderna. And also they share profits. And there's $700 million, however much money was made, whatever the number is that these guys made off of these products. Like, this is, all of it is fucking crazy. There's the revolving door between the CDC and the FDA and then these pharmaceutical drug companies. So the people that make the regulations then go on to have these cushy jobs with the pharmaceutical drug corporations. Like, oh, nothing to see here. It's like, it's open. It's right out in the open.
Right.
And when he talks about all that stuff in his book.
Okay, so there's a lot going on in that clip. First off, again, what you see there, or more like what you don't see there, is Joe Rogan saying that he endorses RFK Jr., right? He had some kind words to say about him. He says that he's the only one that makes sense to Joe, which kind of makes sense in and of itself for somebody with sort of the incoherent ideological framework of a Joe Rogan. It makes sense that RFK Jr. would be his candidate. And honestly, I would respect him if he stood by that. That's kind of the guy who I would expect somebody like Joe Rogan to vote for. That's fine, right? He seems a little bit confused about the nature of our healthcare system or our pharmaceutical system, because it seems like a classic case of somebody getting mad about capitalism without being able to identify that they're getting mad about capitalism. That's what you're frustrated about. If you're talking about the revolving door, if you're talking about the fucked up nature of having the profit motive dictate a healthcare system, those are all issues with capitalism, right? And that's something that we could address through public health policy. It doesn't mean that vaccines are fake or that they're trying to poison people or something like that. It's just an incredibly corrupt and dysfunctional, healthcare and pharmaceutical system. That's an entirely fair conversation to have. But it seems like he's a little bit confused about the core of that, the real nature of that. But again, nothing too surprising here, coming from somebody like Joe Rogan. Now, of course, even though, again, he didn't endorse RFK Jr., this was Trump's response. He says, it will be interesting to see how loudly Joe Rogan gets booed at the next time that he enters the UFC ring, MAGA 2024. So Trump is essentially implying, he's calling for people to boo Joe Rogan the next time that he steps foot in a UFC arena. Now, this is looking a little bit desperate here, is it not? Does this not look like somebody who is feeling a little bit vulnerable right now and is sort of lashing out at anybody who would dare to question him, somebody who he feels like should be in his corner, somebody like Joe Rogan? It'll be interesting to see how loudly he gets booed the next time he enters a UFC ring. Now, I don't think that that's something that probably would have happened. I mean, I think UFC bros, UFC heads are obviously probably avid Joe Rogan listeners, so I don't think that this is something that even would have happened, even with the command here from Trump himself. But immediately after this kind of right-wing pressure comes down on the head of Joe Rogan, he walks it all back. He can't even stand by what he was saying. So here's what Joe Rogan responded to this clip that's been circulating. Here's what he said. He said, "For the record, this isn't an endorsement. This is me saying that I like RFK Jr. as a person, and I really appreciate the way that he discusses things with civility and intelligence. I think that we could use more of that in this world. I also think that Trump raising his fist and saying fight after getting shot is one of the most American fucking things of all time." Okay. I'm not the guy to get political information from. If you want that from a comic, go to Dave Smith. He actually knows what he's talking about. So to be fair, if you're going to, choose between Joe Rogan and Dave Smith to get political information from, go with Dave Smith. Joe is not wrong about that, right? But it also is a little bit pathetic here to be backing down from this. I mean, if you had to publicly endorse somebody, would it be Trump? I mean, really? What does this is a guy, Joe Rogan, keep in mind, who was somewhat of a Bernie Sanders supporter back in the 2020 days. And you've somehow flipped to being like RFK Jr. / Trump. I mean, again, this is kind of why I say that Joe Rogan's political philosophy is completely incoherent, if we're being real about it. There's not much overlap. I mean, there's some overlap in terms of the critiques of the status quo of some of our institutions and the systems that we have set up in place between a Bernie and a Trump and an RFK. But like in terms of these solutions that they are proposing, they could not be more diametrically opposed to one another. So I'm not sure how within the span of a couple of years you go from somebody like Bernie Sanders and thinking that he's reasonable to now suddenly I saw a recent clip of Joe Rogan attacking Tim Walz, and maybe I'll do another clip on that in the next couple of days, but he was attacking Tim Walz as like, forcefully changing the Minnesota state flag to be similar to the Somali flag because he's in the pocket of Somalia or something like that, and talking about tampons in boys' restrooms and things like that. And it's like, is it just the last couple of years? Is this just a perfect example of COVID sort of like destroying somebody's brain? I don't know. You guys tell me. But now we move on. So that's just one aspect of what Trump has been doing recently, getting into beefs with the most popular podcaster in the country. Probably not the best move. But here we have Trump, who again seems to miss his old friend, Joey. Let's go ahead and watch this little clip here from one of his recent rallies. Now, keep in mind, this is a rally that Trump was doing in Montana. Now, we have further reporting that I'll get to here in a second in terms of the lack of rallies that Trump has planned for the immediate future, even though we're like less than 90 days out from the election. He's going and doing a rally in Montana, which is an extreme, safe Republican state for him. It's also a state that has damn near no electoral benefit for him. I mean, what do they have, 5, 6 electoral votes or something like that? But he's going and he's doing a rally in Montana for some reason. And he spends, I swear to God, from the clips I've seen, like half the fucking rally talking about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not your opponent anymore. But here he goes.
The polls, they said he's not going to win, so they couldn't beat me now. I mean, after the debate, he was down, way down in the polls. They didn't even want to show the polls. They said he's not going to win. So they said, we're going to take him out and we're going to put somebody new in. This never happened to anybody before. We spent $100 million fighting crooked Joe Biden. And then all of a sudden they decide to take him out and put somebody else in. She never got one vote. She was the first loser in the primaries. She ran against Joe Biden and everybody else. I think they had like 16 people running. She never made Iowa the first state. I love Iowa. You know why I love it? Because I win it every single time with the farmers. We win it. But she never made Iowa. She was the first one to quit. And now, and stupid, honestly, she was the nastiest to him too, and then he picked her. I couldn't believe it. And she was part of the cabal that got him out. They got him out. They said, we'll do it the nice way, or we'll do it the hard way, Joe. We'll use the 25th Amendment, and we'll call you mentally incompetent, and everybody will believe us. And what they did is a terrible thing, actually. They forced him out. It was a coup. We had a coup. That was the first coup in the history of our country. And it was very successful. He said, okay, I'll leave. If that's what you want, I'll leave. And now he's seeing what The competition is I hear he's going to make a comeback at the Democrat convention. He's going to walk into the room and he's going to say, I want my presidency back. I want another chance to debate Trump. I want another chance.
Okay. So what are we doing here, guys? What are we doing? First off, I love the part where Trump says he loves Iowa. And the reason that he loves Iowa is not because he loves the people of Iowa or the culture of Iowa or he wants to improve the lives of average Iowans. It's that Iowa votes for him. So I love Iowa. You know why? Because Iowa votes for me, right? So therefore I love Iowa, right? For no other reason other than that. But he goes on. Now, to be fair, he's not wrong about Kamala Harris being a wildly unsuccessful 2020 Democratic primary candidate. She did have to drop out before Iowa. That's 100% true, right? Joe Biden ends up picking her for his VP slot. She ends up rising to the position that she's in right now. You did have sort of like a behind closed door pressure campaign. It was also out in the open with voters and donors and everything. But you did have people like Nancy Pelosi and Obama reportedly that were behind the scenes telling Joe Biden, you got to get out, right? Because it's not just a matter of you potentially allowing Trump to walk back into the White House, given how weak of a candidate you are and how abysmal your first debate performance was. But it's also like Joe Biden could have cost Democrats the Senate and the House. I mean, if you guys remember that polling data I was showing you where Senate Democratic candidates, or even just in polling generic Democrat versus Trump, they were going way above where Joe Biden was, right? You had some cases where a Senate Democratic candidate was like 10 percentage points ahead of Joe Biden in a head-to-head with Trump. So it just tells you that like the Democratic Party brand is not necessarily weak right now in American politics. It was Joe Biden who was weak. And so you had this pressure campaign, whatever you want to say about it. Joe Biden decides to step down, whether you want to say that that's willingly or unwillingly. I mean, I would lean towards unwillingly. I don't think that Biden wanted to do that. But it's still not a coup, right? It's not a coup. You have somebody who is clearly senile. Ironically, somebody who many Republicans, I'm pretty sure including Trump himself, have said that he should, resign the presidency because of his mental incompetence. But somehow, at the same time as you're saying that, you're saying you wish that he had stayed in the race, that he should have stayed as the candidate. Well, how does that make sense? He was clearly senile. He should have dropped out. He did end up dropping out. And Kamala was sort of like anointed as his replacement. The real democratic process that should have taken place is Joe Biden never should have ran for re-election in the first place. Then we could have had somewhat of an open Democratic primary, and you would have had more top establishment Democrats throwing their hat in the ring. Maybe it would have been Kamala leading, but then you would have had people like Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, or Josh Shapiro, or whoever the case may be. You could have had a real democratic process take place if there was a real Democratic primary, but Biden didn't allow that to happen. The Democratic Party didn't allow that to happen. And so we just ended up in a position where Kamala was sort of anointed as the natural replacement, and we're moving on from there. But the point is, at some point, you kind of got to move on, right? You can't keep rehashing that you're upset that Biden is out of the race. Biden is out of the race. That's your new reality, right? You're not running against Biden. You're now running against Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. So what is your strategy for that? Well, we're going to have a couple clips here in a second. We also had here, again, him backing up this idea that it was a coup against Biden and suggesting he may actually come back, right? It's not over for Dark Brandon. He may make a return at the DNC convention. But he also said here over on Truth Social, what are the chances that crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the U.S., whose presidency was unconstitutionally stolen from him by Kamala, that's not a typo, he did that on purpose, he says Kamala, Barack, all caps, Hussein Obama. I wonder why he put Hussein in all caps. You guys tell me. Crazy Nancy Pelosi, shifty Adam Schiff, crying Chuck Schumer, and others on the lunatic left crashes the Democratic National Convention and tries to take back the nomination, beginning with challenging me to another debate. He feels that he made a historic, tragic mistake by handing over the U.S. presidency, a coup, to the people in the world who he hates the most, and he wants it back now. So this is his theory. Now listen, guys, I'll be at the DNC, so I'll be there, giving you guys live updates if Joe Biden comes back from the dead. Now, here we have a second clip, again from this Montana rally, in which he's basically sort of like crowdsourcing his attacks on Joe Biden, who, again, is not the guy that he's running against anymore. But here goes Trump deciding which nickname for Biden is hitting the best with the crowd here.
That's correct. I think Crooked Joe is more correct than say. You're like, all right, ready? Crooked first, right? What do you like better? Crooked Joe? Or Sleepy Joe? Not bad.
Okay, so again, that's not your opponent. I mean, like, to be fair, I think Sleepy Joe is one of the all-time greats when it comes to Trump's nicknames that he's come up with. You know, some of the other ones, we had Crooked Hillary. He kind of recycled that with Crooked Joe. I think maybe that's why it's not hitting as hard. But, like, you know, you had Little Marco back in the day. Who else did we have? We had, like, Meatball Ron, although I don't know that that was a Trump-originated nickname, but Meatball Ron is still my favorite of all time. You know, what was Jeb Bush's nickname? Low Energy Jeb, right? I still think Sleepy Joe hit the hardest because he is sleepy. He's constantly sleeping. So I think that was one of his all-time greats. But, again, not your opponent anymore. Maybe, I don't know. They're still trying to workshop the Kamala nicknames. Some of them have come up with, like, Cackling Kamala, Laughing Kamala. It seems like most of their nicknames so far are just about the fact that she laughs in an awkward way, in an over-the-top way. I think you got to dig deeper than that. Now, we also have here JD Vance. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind the shit that we just went through with, I mean, in this one True Social post, he had how many different nicknames, right? Kamabla, I guess that's one. Barack Hussein with the emphasis, maybe you could say that's two. Crazy Nancy, that's three. Shifty Adam Schiff, Crying Chuck Schumer. I mean, at least like half a dozen nicknames, right? And here we have JD Vance coming and whining and bitching and moaning and shitting his pants, saying that Democrats are engaging in schoolyard bully attacks. And I guess probably what he was talking about is Tim Walz making the couch fucker joke at one of the recent Kamala Tim Walz rallies that they did, where basically he said, I'd love to debate JD Vance as long as he's willing to get up off the couch, right? Playing into that meme that's been floating around recently. How is anybody going to take this seriously? Your running mate is Donald Trump. He is the king of the schoolyard bully tactics, which, by the way, is not even something I really have an issue with. I don't care if politicians take low blows. I could give a shit. I would much rather them focus on substantive stuff, but, like, this isn't something that's going to offend me in either direction. Again, I was just giving you credit for Sleepy Joe, right? So it's like, is this really offensive to anybody? But much less to the guy whose running mate is Donald Trump. You're going to get offended by schoolyard bully tactics? Do you need a crying space? Do you need a safe place to go to? Is that what we need for you right now? What are you going to do when you get up on the debate stage with Tim Walz? Are you going to need a cry break in the middle of it where they're going to cut to commercial break and give you a moment to collect yourself from the name calling? What are we talking about here, guys? I got an advertisement lined up later in the same video in a couple minutes here of Trump referring to Democrats as communists and fascists at the same time, by the way. And, you know, all of these different nicknames, it's like, it's kind of hard to throw shots like that when that's your running mate. Now, we also had this, just to show you a little bit of the desperation from Trump and his crowd. This is a recent conspiracy that's been floating around from them. So here it is. Here's from Jody Blues. Proof, the photo of the crowd cheering Kamala by her plane, I believe this was in Detroit, is AI. They're saying it's AI. It's a fake image. The crowd is nearest to the camera and the plane is in focus, but the crowd nearest to the plane are blurry. Reflection from the plane only shows one person, guy in the crowd obviously recording a concert. So, to make a long story short, they are saying that this picture of this crowd is AI generated, that it's fake, that there's no chance that Kamala could have pulled together a crowd this large. Now, to be fair, it was a pretty large crowd. Not a crowd that I would be expecting if you asked me a couple years ago for somebody like Kamala Harris, but it is real. Okay. How do I know that? We have about 2-3 dozen different videos and pictures from people on the ground at this rally when it happened. This is not in dispute. This is not like, oh, this is possibly an AI generated image. It's not. It's verifiably not. But this is something that they're leaning into, which again is just such pathetic copium, right? You're going to lash out. I mean, this even went up all the way to Trump. He's floating the same thing. Has anyone noticed that Kamala cheated at the airport? There was nobody at the plane, and she AI'd it. I don't think that's a term. AI'd it. Can we not do that, please? And showed a massive crowd, in quotations, a crowd of so-called followers, but they didn't exist. They didn't exist. She was turned in by a maintenance worker at the airport when he noticed the fake crowd picture, but there was nobody there. Later confirmed by the reflection in the mirror, like finish on the vice presidential plane. She's a cheater. She had nobody waiting, and the crowd looked like 10,000 people. Same thing happened with her fake crowds at her speeches. This is how they cheat, blah, 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 election interference, etc., etc. Is this not just pathetic, guys? Is this not pathetic? I'm not a Kamala fan. I don't really care what her crowd sizes are, but like, this is what you're going with, man. Do you know how pathetic this comes across? How desperate this comes across? That you're insinuating that she couldn't pull together a crowd of a few 10,000 people at a giant airplane hangar? She couldn't possibly do that, even though we have, again, like a million different angles of this happening. Like, it has to be fake. It has to be AI'd, plural, I guess. It has to be misinformation. It has to be fake news, right? Couldn't possibly be that there's just like a little bit more energy around Kamala after Sleepy Joe dropped out of the election, right? It couldn't possibly be that. Has to be fake. Now, we also have this reporting again that Trump, apparently for the month of August, is really not doing any rallies. Like, this is a reporting here from Christina Wilkie. Trump plans a light campaign schedule for August that defies convention. It also contrasts with August of 2016 when Trump held 27 rallies in 15 states. He later won most of these states in November. So far this month, Trump has held one rally, and apparently there are no more other ones that have been confirmed. I mean, keeping in mind, guys, like, this is arguably the biggest difference between Trump or between Biden and Kamala, is that Biden was physically and mentally incapable of going out and running a full campaign. This is why Pelosi is now attacking him and his campaign and saying, like, oh, I was never really impressed with his campaign apparatus. That's the biggest difference, is just that Kamala can go out in front of a crowd, right? And just by doing the bare minimum, it's a stark difference, a stark break from Joe Biden. And now Trump is turning into the Joe Biden of this race, where people are more and more concerned about his age and his mental decline now that Biden is not there as a comparison point. And he's doing like one rally a month. Guys, we're less than 90 days out from the election. Kamala just visited like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada within the span of less than a week. What are you doing? Do you not want to win the race? I mean, like, what is going on with this? One rally in a state that is not even a swing state, in Montana. What the fuck? What is going on? Now, to finish off here, we just got a couple more things. We have here Trump attacking Tim Walz. Now, again, guys, I could come up with criticisms of Tim Walz. I've shown you guys his record, his statements on Israel. That's not great. He has a very solid domestic policy record, at least relative to other establishment Democratic figures. So he's good on domestic policy, but I could come up with some critiques of Tim Walz. I could definitely come up with many critiques of Kamala Harris. But Republicans are just flailing. Like, I have not seen strong attacks from them so far. Here is Donald Trump's latest line of attack, or an attempt at an attack on Tim Walz. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
She's a radical left person at a level that nobody's seen. She picked a radical left man that is, he's got things done that he has positions that are just not, it's not even possible to believe that they exist. He's going for things that nobody's ever even heard of. Heavy into the transgender world, heavy into lots of different worlds. She's a radical.
Heavy into the transgender world. Guys, what is that? Heavy into the transgender world, heavy into many worlds. Many worlds. Like, did you not do any opposition research? Can you, first off, he didn't even say Tim Walz. He didn't even say his name. He said, Kamala has brought on this man, this radical, amorphous, vague notion of a man onto her campaign. And he's a radical. He is a radical, the likes of which we have never seen in this country. Why is he a radical? Well, he's heavy into the transgender world and many other worlds. So, I mean, like, you can go and look at his policy accomplishments in Minnesota. You go ahead, take a war on some of those policies. What's it going to be? Childcare, paid family leave, paid sick leave, bolstering the nursing unions in Minnesota, protecting abortion rights. Are these any of the fights that you want to take on? They've tried to with things like the Tampon Tim nickname, which, by the way, is complete bullshit. It was basically based on this piece of legislation that made it through Minnesota. Tim Walz signed it into law. It was essentially just guaranteeing, right, or requiring that schools carry tampons, right, in public schools for people to have access to. It didn't designate like Tim Walz signed an executive order saying boys must have tampons with them at all times. Like, that's not what it was. It was just generally like, hey, in public schools, let's make shit easier for people who need tampons. How about that, right? Nothing radical, nothing crazy, but they're trying to attack him on that. He's Tampon Tim. He's trying to ruin your boys' lives by putting them in front of tampons. Like, what are we doing here, guys? This is the strength of your attack. You know, as somebody who grew up, I lived in a household where it was me, my mother, and my sister. So obviously in all of the bathrooms throughout the house, for the most part, there's always going to be tampons. Like, there's always a bunch of shit like that I never use, right? But did that like ruin my life? Did that cause me like great internal mental distress or something? Like, even if there were tampons in the boys' restroom, who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? What are we talking about? You don't need it. You don't use it. Move on with your life. We're talking about like a little piece of cloth. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? These are the kinds of attacks that they're coming up with. Heavy into the trans world, heavy into many other worlds. What are the other worlds? Childcare, abortion rights, legalizing weed. Okay, pick the fight. Be specific. Criticize him on some of the actual legislation that he has managed to get through in Minnesota. Do that. But he can't, because I don't think he wants to take on that fight, to be honest. And listen, you look at polling data like this, you could kind of see why. I mean, here from Crystal, Walz, by far, the most popular person in this election. His favorability ratings are plus 11%. Kamala Harris's is plus 2, which is crazy given where she was just a couple of months ago as Biden's VP. This has shot up to the point where it's now in the positive realm. You have Trump minus 3, which I believe is also up from recent polls. This is sort of him hitting his peak here. And then Vance, negative 11. So Walz and Vance, in terms of VP picks, are like polar opposites of each other. Walz is plus 11, Vance is minus 11. So I guess we'll see who regretted their VP pick more as time goes on. Now, we also have this, and I'm not even going to play this ad. This was standard Trump fascist rhetoric. He's returned to Twitter, okay? That's the short story of it. He came back onto Twitter. He's doing this town hall thing with Elon Musk tonight. You know, I don't know what the fuck that's going to be like. I don't know what they're going to talk about, but they're doing that tonight. And I guess maybe they had a conversation behind the scenes and whatever. Trump is now back on Twitter. He's been posting. He posted like 6-7 times within the span of 30 minutes or something. And so he's back on Twitter, right? He was on a little bit of a hiatus there for a few years after January 6th. He was initially banned and then unbanned by Elon. And then he refused to come back because he's doing his Truth Social thing. And now he's back. That's the short story of it. And so he started posting advertisements on here. This one was a standard. We're going to rid the country of Marxists and villainous, communists and whatever the fuck else and take back the country. Standard sort of fascist rhetoric there. So there you go. This is the latest on Donald Trump, guys. I don't know. You guys tell me. I've never seen this sort of like a 180 in my lifetime in terms of American domestic presidential politics. Like, just a couple weeks ago, like it feels like it was months ago, but it was really just less. I think it was less than a month ago that people were insisting, no, Biden is going to stay in the race. He has to stay in the race. If you want him to drop out, it's going to be a constitutional crisis. It's going to be a massive legal battle. You're going to be handing the election to Trump. It's going to, divide the party. And it's like, look at what has happened. Joe Biden dropped out. It was the most popular thing he's ever done. Kamala sort of took up the mantle, and she has a much better chance of defeating Donald Trump. If that's your priority over everything else, then that was the right move, right? If you are the Democratic Party, it was absolutely the right move to ditch Joe Biden and to install Kamala Harris as a replacement. Now, is she going to win? I don't know. It's sort of in, still in the toss-up realm. But as time goes on, unless Republicans, unless Trump, unless JD can stop being weird little fucking freaks and they can figure out their messaging and attack Kamala and attack Tim Walz on things that are going to actually stick, then it looks like the Democrats are potentially heading for like the turnaround upset victory, that we haven't seen in a long time.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying